This morning. Our goal this morning is to help you to understand more about direct measures of assessment. You're going to be provided with many different examples today from different disciplines, and hopefully you will be able to apply some of what you learn to your own courses. We often think that indirect measures of assessment are directly measuring student learning, but in reality they're not. They are often just perceptions of learning. For example, surveys and interviews, they don't really show what a student learned. I could say, well, I learned a lot in your class, but it doesn't show what I learned. The same with course evaluations and a final grade or retention and graduation rates. Those are all indirect measures of student learning. Today we want to focus on direct measures that show specifically and exactly what the student learned. Some examples of those include comprehensive exams that are linked to the learning objectives for that particular class or unit, or comprehensive exams that include pre- and post-testing. Because I may do very well on the final exam, but how do you know that I learned that material in your course? Maybe I already knew a lot of it before I came to your course. So today you'll hear a little bit about using prior knowledge as a method of direct assessment. Research papers, portfolios, case studies, performances, reflections, these can all be direct measures of student learning. We're also going to talk some about scoring rubrics today because they're an excellent method of assessing those direct measures. A scoring rubric is a scoring guide that seeks to evaluate a student's performance based on the sum of a full range of criteria rather than just a single numerical score. And it's an authentic assessment used to evaluate students' work by measuring the product according to real-life criteria. The reasons why students tend to like rubrics and the advantages they have for our students: they can clarify any vague or fuzzy goals that the students might not understand because they're broad, and it can help to specify and signify what those really mean. They help students to understand what is expected of them. If I know what's expected of me, it makes it so much easier to be able to produce that. It makes it easier to know what it is that I'm supposed to be accomplishing and achieving if I know in advance what that is, what it looks like. Research indicates that it helps students self-improve by comparing their work against the rubric and ultimately increasing achievement and learning. And it provides descriptive feedback to students. Why we might like using rubrics: it allows for accurate and unbiased scoring so that we consistently score each student the same over and over again, and our own biases don't come into play. Perhaps a student writes a paper about something that is of special interest to me, and if I don't have a scoring rubric, I might read that paper and think, I really like this paper, this is an A paper. But I might be biased by the fact that it's about multiple intelligence, one of my favorite subjects in educational psychology. And someone else who writes a paper about another topic that's not my favorite subject, I might not view it in the same way. But having a scoring rubric helps me to view it exactly the same across students. It also provides both qualitative and quantitative data and detailed results of student learning when you aggregate the rubric results. And overall, I think the reason why I like rubrics the most is because it improves my efficiency. It makes it much quicker and easier and also consistent when I use a rubric to grade. So in the long run, it saves me time. Now you're going to hear from one person who uses triangulated data from two indirect measures, focus groups and student pre- and post self-assessments, and a direct measure demonstrated by a scoring rubric to assess academic success for lifelong learning. A very difficult outcome to measure, but Jackie Wilson has found a way to do that in her flipped classroom. Jackie Wilson from Residential Life and the LRC will model the effectiveness of direct measures of student learning in her LRC 101A class.
you, Vicki. Let me pass these out. I brought just an abbreviated version of my syllabus for the first 4 pages so you get a sense of the class and also see the final product paper assignment detailed on the back page. I've got a revised version.
Oh, okay. Sure.
You want me to plug it in?
Just unclick it. Yeah.
No, I need
You'll do it yourself.
You can do
Okay.
that.
Oh, yeah.
I'll figure it out. So again, thank you for your patience. My name is Jackie Wilson. I work in residential life. I wear a couple hats here at UMBC. My LRC 101A course is the syllabus you've got in front of you. This is a academic success for lifelong learning course. It's a very diverse cohort. And I'm going to talk about my direct measures. I can get control of my slideshow here. Again, the student cohort is a very diverse group of students, many of whom are on academic probation. So these are non-traditional students, all 4 classes, veterans, students with special needs. It's a very intense group of students who are all trying to learn how to become successful students. I knew that the course was working. I had seen the improved GPAs, improved retention rates, improved success rates at UMBC. So I knew the class was working. I knew they were learning. But I really wanted to try to dig deeper and prove with some tangible and more comprehensive data. So here are just some abbreviated learning outcomes for the course. You can see a little more detail in the syllabus. Again, we're trying to give students some very basic college student skills here at UMBC. Time management, emotional intelligence, ability to communicate more effectively, self-management, ability to articulate some success strategies, course outcomes, self-awareness, and again, self-management, personal responsibility. So here's sort of a 3-part measure that I used last semester in this course. So I did a self-assessment. So they did a pre and a post self-assessment, which I'm going to go into a little more detail in a minute. And then I had them reflect on those results through a focus group format venue. And then finally, I used the direct measure rubric in Blackboard to really sort of bring it all together. So sort of a 3-part, if you will, measure of their learning. Okay, so they took the self-assessment at the beginning of the class and then they retook it again at the end of class. They were reminded of their self-assessment scores from the beginning and then they compared their scores, rescoring them themselves, and then they actually reflected on the changes in the scores, mostly improved, and how they got there through the coursework. There were some students that went down in scores. This happened. We kind of talked about that and tried to figure out what that meant. But this was a very powerful kind of aha moment for them to reflect in the classroom. They said, wait a minute, my emotional intelligence score was so much lower at the beginning and now I've really improved in scores. It was a very tangible way for them to see their own learning and sort of share that in the context of a very safe group with the course of their fellows in the course. They also had a chance to articulate to the group, to their peers in the class, what did that change mean to them? What did it mean that I was just much more emotionally intelligent now? Like, how was I going to use that? And then they also, this was the real benefit to me, they were able to articulate from the course with very specific examples what they learned, which activities really spoke to them. When they thought back about their learning, what do they remember? And so those examples I was able to take back and really know that those things that we did in class had the most powerful impact for them as they reflected on their own learning with improved scores. These are some of my Res Life students helping illustrate here today. So then the focus group questions we talked about. So, which areas of the self-assessment did you see improved scores? Which items from the course do you think really made the difference? This is a course that uses a lot of guided journals, film clips. It's a very diverse teaching methodology to reach a lot of different learning styles. I gave them a case study. So you're having trouble on a course in UMBC. Think about, before you took the class, what would you be doing versus are there some strategies you think you'd be able to put into place now after you've taken the class? Then I talked about, let's describe any new habits you think you've obtained since taking the class. Talk about new study skills or time management tools. Another piece of this class is the victim-creator mentality. So students really try to grapple with the concept of looking at themselves as a victim to chance and circumstances versus being a creator and an active agent of their own education. And then again, share any other concept that you feel you'll take from the course and use actively in future courses. So, and again, it was a space for them to truly reflect on the methodology of the course. It was very valuable for me too. So now I'm going to move on to my direct measure rubric in Blackboard. So, and again, this was with the assistance of Jennifer Harrison. Thank you, Jennifer, for your work and help on that. So I developed 5 criteria for the final paper. And I also highlighted 2 of the undergraduate functional competencies. Functional competency 3, the critical analysis and reasoning, and then functional competency 1, the oral and the written communication. So 5 simple categories for the final project, and I broke all of those down into 3 levels. Real simple levels. Either you need improvement, it was a solid paper, or it was outstanding. And then the cool thing too was that grading was quite simple. Within Blackboard, I simply needed to click one button for each of the 5 criteria for each student. So a very simple grading ability for me. And then the beauty of it was then Blackboard was able to share all of these reports based on my simple grading. So I'll show you some of the reports that Blackboard gave me after this. So the first report is about overall performance. So I was able to see sort of just a broad strokes assessment of how they did for this 40-point paper in terms of just actual score. And then there was a possible versus actual score, so I could see with more detail on all of my criteria the sort of the maximum possible versus how the actual scores fell for each of the categories. So a real nice snapshot on that. And then finally, the frequency distribution. Jennifer showed us one of these earlier. So a comprehensive breakdown of all the percentages of each of my 3 values against the 5 criteria. So I could see, again, quickly how many people fell into the needs improvement for each category, the solid paper versus the outstanding. And so for my work going forward into the next semester, I really wanted to just look at one piece of the rubric so I could keep it real simple for improving the next semester's work. So what I focused on was I was kind of surprised and perhaps a bit troubled at the poor writing and the inability to actually achieve the 3-page paper requirement. This seemed very obvious to me in talking about the assignment and going over the syllabus. Obviously it wasn't. This is what the rubric showed me, that the good writing and the at least 3 pages was eluding some of my students despite my best efforts. So that's what I wanted to work on this semester. So for this semester I am working on, again, focusing on the preponderance of poor writing and insufficient paper length that the rubric clarified for me. And to improve this learning measure, I've added a draft component of the paper. So I've provided some more scaffolding for this course, an advanced draft that's going to allow me the venue to provide students with the writing feedback and more instructor feedback on the appropriate paper length. Hey, you turned into 2.2 pages. What's up with that? Let's not do that for the final draft. And then I'm expecting to see some very different results on the good writing in at least 3 pages section of the rubric that I'm continuing to use for fall 2015 for my section. So I have really high hopes about that going forward. And I didn't know if you had questions or answers or feedback that I could answer at this point. Pretty straightforward. I was really surprised about the results. It gave me some really good data I suspected perhaps in the past, but with the concrete information about the poor writing, again, to focus on one piece of it going into the next semester. And again, I will be sharing whether those results are successful with that additional scaffolding.
That's really fabulous that the Blackboard gave you all that valuable data so you could improve your teaching. Sarah Lupin uses the measurement of prior knowledge to demonstrate the effectiveness of her team-based learning approach. Through a pre- and post-test method, she assesses learning outcomes in a biology course. In the biology department, Sarah teaches classes in physiology and nutrition. She is also our resident consultant trainer in team-based learning and enjoys doing other faculty development work too. Thank you, Sarah.
All right. We're back at there's another slideshow, right? The one you had originally? Because that was the new version. Perfect.
Okay.
It seems to have suffered from going from a Mac to a PC.
Yeah.
That may be either that or I've secretly scrambled these so you can't reveal them.
That you're learning the language.
Yeah, well, you can see that it's a multiple choice test. Part of it was a multiple choice. Not all of it, but what part of it was. So this is from my anatomy and physiology class. This is a very simple technique that was incorporated in your presentation as well, which can work, you know, I teach biology, it could work for anything where you have some competencies that can be assessed in an objective way. So I do this for a couple of reasons. So this is the prior knowledge survey. It is a pre-test. So they'll answer these same questions again. I give this to them on the very first day of class. And the questions are also embedded in the final exam. It's worth noting that you can embed questions in the final exam without them really being on the final exam, if you know what I mean. In other words, you don't have to score them as part of your final exam score if it's not something you're interested in that students don't know. And embedding it in the final exam gives them some reason to attempt to answer the question successfully. So usually I choose things that are going to be in the final exam anyway because my final exam is comprehensive. And so it does cover the whole gamut of things that I'm interested in students being able to do, and then take a subset of those and put them on the prior knowledge survey. So it serves as a pretest for that, and I'll get to that data in a second. But it also serves, you know, literally to see what they know coming into my class. There's some things that you would expect your students to know because of the prerequisites for your class that you might be surprised to know that they don't remember. And other things that they really are quite solid on. So in this class, for example, we have to learn about a number of molecules that operate on cell membranes, and the students actually are completely clear on one of the most important of these proteins, the sodium-potassium pump. So I don't spend any time on class on the action of that molecule because they really are very clear about it. And the first time, any time I spent would be a waste of time. So this stuff you can learn directly from this that you can apply just from the pre-test, just from the prior knowledge survey. That you can use right away. And then also you can use it as a pretest. So this is, the anatomy and physiology is a 2-semester course. So, you know, it's perhaps not that exciting to show that they learn things. I mean, you certainly would hope that they would learn things in your classes. it's maybe a little more interesting to see which items are they showing a lot of improvement on. So you basically see items that they didn't know at the beginning and they know at the end, right? That's good. Supposedly they learned that in your class. You also see things where they knew it pretty well at the beginning, so there's not much change because of a ceiling effect. And you see things where they really didn't know it the whole time. They don't know it at the end, they didn't know it at the beginning. Clearly that's something where you need to change the way you're approaching that objective. So those are sort of the three categories of things, and you can use that immediately, just as you did, to feedback and change the way that you're approaching those objectives. It can be challenging because you say, well, I need to spend more time on X. Well, what are you spending less time on? But hopefully you can get a little of that suggestion of what that should be from these tests as well. And you know, I showed them that they learn things. I mean, maybe I showed myself, but they learn things even though I stopped lecturing. Magic, they still learn things, so that's good. It was also baseline data here in Anatomy of Physiology 1 for what I call my forgetting analysis, which is where I gave them some questions that were, so there's some of the questions that were on both the pre-test and the post-test for A&P1 were on the pre-test for A&P2. In other words, when they came back and they had the whole summer to forget things, because I teach it spring, fall, or I did. So they had the whole summer, and then I would give them the same questions as part of the pre-test and see what they forgot over the summer, because really, who cares if they learn things if they only know it in that week, right? They did significantly forget things, but not much. So over the summer, they still retained most of their A&P1 knowledge, which is good because the whole idea is that you have to know the stuff from A&P1 in order to be successful in the second semester of the course. So there's a variety of ways you can use the data. In this case, I teach both these courses, A&P1 and A&P2, but you could also, in collaboration with those in your department who teach courses that are either the prerequisite for your course or for which your course is the prerequisite, have some assessments where you're really talking to each other. At least in our department, there's not that much discussion about this kind of thing between faculty members, so that's another thing that could be improved. The best thing about this measure is that it's super easy to implement, and if it's a multiple choice or partly objective test, it's very easy to score and get that data quite easy. Okay.
Thank you. Now, Carolyn Forestier, did I say that correctly?
Forestier.
Thank you. From Political Science, will demonstrate how she uses the talk show approach and embeds a direct measure minute paper reflection in a student survey in her political science course to measure student success with her pop culture learning approach.
Okay, well, I'm Carolyn Forrester. I'm in the Department of Political Science, and I'm here because last spring I was at a pedagogical workshop about something, and I raised my hand and I made a comment about something that I was doing in the classroom, and Jennifer encouraged me to do a direct measure, and I'd never really heard of it, and so at the end of the semester I passed out a survey to my students, and they gave some really interesting feedback based on the approach that I was adopting. So let me tell you just a little bit about the genesis of this approach. So I taught this course, Comparative Political Analysis, and it's very theory-driven. We have like a thick reader, and every week students are reading maybe 6 or 7 different perspectives from some of the heavy hitters in comparative politics. And traditionally, the method that I used to teach this course was largely lecture-based or discussion-based, and it was like, you know, passing out discussion questions, letting students discuss, coming back together, and then working as a group. And I taught this course, and after about 10 or 11 weeks, I was just really tired of this particular approach, and so I basically said, that's it, I'm turning it over to you. And for the last 2 weeks of the course, I basically said, you guys figure it out. And I had 2 groups of 30, and I said, good luck. And you know, I just kind of sat back and watched what happened. And what happened was this talk show thing that happened, right? And so what did this comprise? What was this? Basically, my students organized themselves into a talk show where one person served as the host, all the different readings were represented by a student who were the guests, and everybody else was the callers. And basically what they did was they had this very orchestrated conversation where the host, you know, they were wearing the big earphones and coming in and doing this, and it was great. And I was sitting in the back just completely enjoying this. And they, over the 2 weeks, this was this very elaborate thing, and they, you know, this is how this happened. So basically they discussed the readings, they had it all orchestrated in advance. They had passed out these discussion questions to each other. The callers knew what questions they were supposed to ask, and so they had this big orchestrated thing. And it was really this very fun thing. And so I thought, you know, maybe I'll try this on a course level. Let me see if I can bring this into the classroom as a pedagogical approach. So I came up with this. It was a Tuesday, Thursday class. And what we did was on the Tuesday, we had the talk show. So I separated the class of 30 into various groups. And each group, one had to identify a host, and then the guests, and then the rest of the class was responsible for doing the readings and for being the callers. And then what we did on Thursday was I basically took control again and said, all right, let's go through and see if we left anything out and you know, recap. And it was like more of a traditional lecture format. And so, so this was the thing that I did, right? And we did this all semester long. On Tuesday we had the talk show, and on Thursday we had the traditional method. And so what I did at the end was that I distributed the survey, because I was interested in knowing, rather than just sort of getting my SEQ or my blue sheet saying, you know, what did you think? I wanted to ask very specific questions, this direct results, like reflect on how this approach facilitated your learning. And I passed the survey out to the 60 students, and I got 26 of them back, so 43%. And this is what we got. So I asked them just a very straightforward question. What was the most useful aspect of the talk show approach? And we have this breakdown. 46% of them said that the approach made readings easier to understand, which was very useful for me because the students were talking to each other, and they were highlighting. It was really interesting for me pedagogically to see what the students would highlight as important versus what I would highlight as important. So that was interesting. 38% said that it enhanced transferable skills, such as summary and analysis. It wasn't just a matter of reading these things and coming to class thinking that maybe they'd raise their hand once and make a comment or something like that. They really had to understand what the author was saying. Application of theory, but also public speaking. That was something that I, you know, maybe like in terms of a transferable skill, in the beginning of like my thinking about this course, I would not have envisioned, but you know, they had to develop their public speaking skills because they were in charge of this person's particular perspective. And 13% said that the course was engaging. It was engaging because the students, they were moving all around. I sat in the back. I sat in the back with my computer and took elaborate notes, and you know, so they were actively participating. So they found this to be what was useful about it. But for me, what was more interesting was the next question, which is what was most frustrating to you about the approach, and where like might we make improvements to it? And 46%, very, you know, and I think that this 46 is kind of qualitatively combined with this 8% at the bottom is with preparation. Because when a student wasn't a guest, when a student wasn't responsible for material, it was very easy for them not to do the reading. And as a result, it was very easy for them not to be a caller and just to basically shut down. And at a certain point, I said that they all had to turn off their computers because like I kind of went around the back and I noticed they're on all sorts of other things, not really opening Word and taking notes and stuff like that. So I said, all right, when someone else is speaking, all computers are off. But there was an uneven preparation. Whereas before, when I was traditionally doing the lecture method, or the traditional lecture method, I would have students write papers. Like every week, they were writing a paper. So I knew they were doing the reading, and they were much more prepared in the discussion. So here I was in a later iteration of class with much more uneven preparation. 16% said the material was difficult, and that was frustrating. That's a hard one to respond to unless we come up with different ways to engage with the material. And 13% said it was intimidating to speak in class, but there were some qualitative responses that said that that got easier over time. So, so these are what we call the direct results, because we're asking students to reflect directly on the experiences that they had in the classroom during a particular experience. Now, indirectly, this is what we call indirect results. I asked a simple question: would you suggest that I do this again? And it was interesting to me to see that the overwhelming majority said yes, even though they were saying that there was uneven preparation. So 85% said the approach was helpful. When their group was presenting, they said that this approach was very helpful because they either were the host and they had to understand all the questions, or they were the guests and they had, you know, domain over particular material. 69% said the approach was helpful when they served as callers, meaning that they got to listen and then they got to ask questions. And 77% of them encouraged me to try it again, so I think I will this spring. But what I'm going to do, and I think what the takeaway message from this, is that when you do something like this, you can really think strategically about the solutions that you bring into your classroom. So my question is, how do I encourage students to do the reading even when they don't have a specific role? And I think a couple of these, sort of innovations that I can introduce, for example, like a triple entry, as it's called. A triple entry is where I say, do the reading, pull out a passage or a quote, reflect on it, and then reflect on it again. Reflect on what you reflected on, right? And so I could have this due on Blackboard before any of the talk show happens. So I could, have these assignments due. I could have a short weekly quiz. That was something I thought about too. When students have quizzes, they more often do the reading. Or the other thing I could do is somehow stagger groups, but also maybe have some paper writing accompanying the groups. So there are these different things that I'm playing with, things that I can do to perhaps make the class, make it so that more people are actively preparing. Furthermore, so a lot of my students responded that they found the readings difficult. The readings are difficult. They're difficult for me. This is something I have to tell my students. I read things twice, 3 times. Some of these things you just don't get on the first round. And you have to teach them how to read in a way that is constructive. So one thing I was thinking about doing, before I was doing the talk show on Tuesday and the recap on Thursday, I was actually thinking about reversing it. That I would take Tuesday to introduce what I think are the main points, and then to have the talk show format on Thursday so we can maybe flush out some interesting things and have the students take control of the material and maybe even apply it to some real life scenarios and things like that. So, I'll finish there and take questions at the end.
Next, Ann Spence from Mechanical Engineering and current interim director of CWIT will demonstrate how she directly measures learning in her flipped classroom for technical writing and presentation scoring.
So I'm glad to see that y'all are in class today. What I noticed from your quizzes was that you were struggling a bit with one of the topics. I don't know if you felt like the videos that you saw before class were difficult to interpret or what's going on. So what I want you to do right now is I want to talk to the person next to you about the topic that you felt was most difficult to understand. So go ahead and take a couple of minutes to review that with each other. Okay, so this is the way I start my mechanical engineering junior level introduction to engineering mathematics course. Typically in engineering, we lecture. We derive equations on the board. My back is to the classroom most of the time. And I was guilty of this for a long period of time until I really started reflecting on how the students were getting the concepts. And they were only able to regurgitate whatever they saw me do. And what I really wanted them to do was become true problem solvers and be able to take the content and apply it. And I felt that my time should be spent with them learning to apply the content, not giving them the content. So that's when I decided about 3 years ago to flip my classroom. My students have to view 2 7 to 8 minute videos before each class. That's each twice per week. The videos, they know which ones they're supposed to watch ahead of time. They have a quiz before they come to class. It only has about 3 problems on it. One will probably reflect on some of the content. One will be an actual execution of a problem that they have to do themselves. I release those right after the last lecture, so you can't move forward quickly because I want them to be fresh right when they step into my classroom, so that we all know what the content is that we're doing and what we're trying to connect. So what I do is I try to make those, since I'm an early morning person, I make them do early, like at 8 a.m. on the morning of the lecture, and then I go in and I kind of review them to see, because they're doing them at like 2 in the morning, right? I'm not up at that time, but I am up at 6. So I then go back in and I kind of reflect on what they've done. I do it in Blackboard, so all the scores are there, the percentages are there, the statistics are there for how they're performing on each item. Then I ask them to kind of reflect back on that themselves. Occasionally I'll ask them to lead a small review for like 3 minutes. Someone tell me what you learned in the content, so that I'm not pushing what I think, but they're gathering from each other, from their peers, the things that they think are important. Then in class, what we do is they are in groups. They are solving problems. The first fairly easy problem to kind of get their juices flowing, and then must submit those to me, and I can see their thinking. I can see what they're learning as they're putting it down, and then I can score those items as well. I've found that students are very resistant to this type of engagement in the first couple of weeks of class because I'm holding them accountable for their own learning. They eventually, 90% of them eventually come around to my way of thinking by the end of it, they think it's a good idea. 10% I think you're pretty much not going to reach. They're just not going to buy into this. But I think in lecturing, we lose a lot of kids anyway. So I think this approach is really effective. So I use the quizzes and evaluate those. I use their work in class, again, using a rubric every time for scoring those to make sure I'm being fair. And then finally, they do a quiz, or they'll do multiple quizzes in their discussion period. And of course, that's based on taking the content, applying it to a problem, and doing it on their own. So they had the activity in the class, in a group, where they had to help each other. And then they move into a place in the discussion period later where they're going to have to produce on their own. I found it to be, the students seem to, based on the exam scores and the quiz scores, they seem to be getting the material at a higher level than they were before. I'm also able to take them farther into the content than I was able to before. A lot of faculty will say to me, well, how can I possibly cover all of this content? Well, a lot of it, like Sarah said, you don't need to cover. There are some things they have, so skip those things and go to the things that are really, they really need to be pulling and teasing out in order for them to understand what they need to do. How are they going to apply this when they get into the industry? Ultimately, that's what I'm trying to produce as a kid who knows what to do and can go out and figure out how to solve their own problems. So that's kind of the end of my thing, and I think we're probably ready for some questions if anybody has it. Or you are.
No, go
You're
ahead.
done.
Go ahead. You can take questions.
Questions from the panel on in for the panel.
Is this the rubric that you're using? The one that's on the board?
This is actually, I forgot that I was supposed to talk about flipped classroom. So what I have there is this is my rubric for evaluating presentations and technical writing. So if anybody wants that. So my rubric is not up there for what I talked about.
Oh,
So,
I was trying to make
no,
it
no, it makes absolutely no connection whatsoever because I realized this morning I was going to talk about the wrong thing. So.
This was good. I like it.
Yep.
I have a question, because we are trying to implement the classroom also.
Mm-hmm.
And that was great to videos to have like the tools or how to do Durham this.
How do I do my what?
The videos.
The videos. So the first time I did it, because I didn't want to put a lot of effort in it unless I knew it was going to be successful, I found some online
Okay.
that were delivering content in a way that I felt I would deliver it. But later on, as I started doing it, I was getting feedback from the students about things that they liked and didn't like about the videos. So I started going in and making my own. And I have a lot of it, and the Faculty Development Center does a lot on some different tools that we have on campus that you can use to develop your own videos.
Well, you can also just use cheap or free tools online.
Yep.
You got a camera on your computer, you hit record,
Yep.
talk. I have my slides up on my screen capture
Yep,
software. So they see me going through the slides and they hear me talking. Usually I have the camera on so they can see me while I'm
I
talking.
seem to like that better.
Yeah.
When they can actually see.
So it's
you.
very easy. Once you know how to do it.
The quizzes that the students take in the morning, are those counted towards their grade? And how will you weigh the sort of, before you
Right.
taught them or
Right.
before they taught each other?
Right. So they need to, so like I teach the class Monday, Wednesday, around 9 in the morning. So it becomes available Monday right after class. So they could do it, any time in that interim time frame. They probably have already watched the videos. Now they're just trying to reflect back on what they did so they're fresh. So the way I use them is they get a grade for it. It's a smaller percentage. I think it's only about 10% are these quizzes. And if I start seeing that they're not doing them, I kind of may change that, to say, we're going to bump this up. And then they have to write their names down on who's on their team. So I do kind of go in and compare this individual's quiz score with the individuals, with the team score on the team. And I sometimes will actually assign them to teams, where I try to find a student who's not performing as well and a high performing and then a middle performing, and I have them on their teams together. You do a little bit of that in your TVL, assigning teams that way. Does that answer your question?
You're really interested in your kind of case study with your focus group. You ask students how they would handle a situation before and how they would handle it after. Do you see a lot of kind of aha moments?
I do, Carrie. The focus group was, I'm telling you, it was a magical time because they could see that they learned. They were so proud of themselves. They were just, you could tell that they were really, really pleased. But the case study, many of them were able to kind of reflect back at when they first started the class. And they talked about how for example, they said, I would be too afraid to go see the professor. I wouldn't go to the office hours. I wouldn't know where to start. One of the big components of the course, we work on interdependence. So we really spend a lot of time talking about how to use your resources. And then what they're able to do is when they think about all the resources that we discussed in the class, including talking to professors, asking questions in class, going to the office hours so you can connect with the faculty one-on-one, they knew that they had the confidence now at the end of the class that they would be able to actually engage with the faculty in a way that they simply could not have accessed before the class.
I'm Carolyn Forstier. I should put this back on.
I was fascinated by it, but I was curious, was that the product or was that an assessment? What was the outcome after they completed the talk show? Did they submit a paper? Did they do anything with it? Or was that actually the evaluation?
No, that's a good question. Every time someone served as a host or a guest, they were responsible for turning in a paper that integrated all of the readings together. And then they had to apply those readings to a current event that's happening of their choosing. So the idea was for them, because if I hadn't done something like that, the students who were the guests would have only read their one specific piece. So to get them to read all of them, they had to turn in an assignment. So each student had to turn in 2 of these assignments as the semester went on. All of them, the host and the guest. The callers, no. The callers were part of the audience, but their turn was coming. The class in the beginning, everyone was put into 2 groups. And so they knew what those groups were on the very first day, so they got to choose the themes and if they wanted to work with particular friends or something like that. But they had to turn in 2, I think it was 5 pages each, those shorter papers. And then at the end of the term, they had to turn in a larger research paper based on almost all of the readings and things like that. So in the beginning, on the syllabus, I indicated that the presentations would be graded. And then at the end of the day, I stopped doing that. Some people were so painfully shy, and you could tell that it was very difficult for them. And it was also obvious that they didn't understand the reading 100%, and I didn't want to give them a low grade. And I wanted to see how they did on. They did well on their paper, but the presentation. So I saw that as more of a skill that could be developed, and I didn't want to. The class wasn't about their public speaking skills. It was just something that they were going to get along the way. So eventually I told them, I said, don't worry, they would come into the office. I'm so nervous. I said, all right, give me talk to me in office hours. What are you going to tell the class? And, sometimes we would work one-on-one that way to prepare them for it. But some of them were really, it was very nerve-wracking for them. It was obvious.
Sarah, how did you administer your pre-post test? Was it Blackboard? Is it another technology used on paper?
Paper.
So you're doing all the scoring by hand. You're putting in something you're looking at, or are you just kind of eyeballing it?
If you score multiple choice questions page by page instead of exam by exam, it takes practically no time. No? Yeah. I mean, the first page is CBADD, CBADD, CBADD. You can get a page done with 100 students in, 5 minutes, and then you go to the next one. It takes no time. Plus, don't you have times in your day when you're tired of doing thinking things? And, the prospect of doing a non-thinking but productive thing is very attractive.
I'm getting stuff done.
So, by 9 p.m., I'm not, writing tests. I can only grade things.
So then how do you do the sort of criteria and analysis to see which one, what do you need to see for, what do you need to see less?
Yeah, so that would be much easier if it was electronic. In fact, if you did a Scantron, it would tell you exactly. So that, you're right. That if it's very many items, you can do that. This is fairly short, so it wasn't that hard to do it. But you're right that software would tell you immediately versus going through. But yeah, I went through each one and saw how many people got it right and how many people got it wrong, so, for each item. So you're right about that.
Any other questions? Before you leave, I wanted to share 2 scoring rubrics that I used in my first year seminar. And the 2 main points I want to make are, one, that you can use the scoring rubric to measure things that aren't very easy to measure in a test. With one of the scoring rubrics in here, you'll see that I'm measuring embracing social justice values and attitudes. My course is called Diversity, Ethics, and Social Justice in the Context of Schools. And I wanted to find a way to measure whether students were actually embracing social justice values, and I was able to do that through a scoring rubric, where I would not have been able to do that through a midterm or a final exam. And the second point I wanted to make is that one of the major criticisms of scoring rubrics is that it reduces risk-taking and creativity. And if you look at the case study scoring rubric in here, I think that it's clear to see, even if a student aims for 3 instead of a 4, there's still a lot of room for creativity and risk-taking, because it's prescribed, but it's not prescribed so much that the student can't do his or her own thinking. Any other questions before we let you go down to your next session? Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.